Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm curious about
Building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
Hi, welcome to the Curious Folks podcast. This podcast is for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla. And on this episode, we're speaking with Jocelyn Silva about erogenous zones and stepping outside of the box when it comes to giving and receiving pleasure. But before we do, I need to address something that has been annoying me, namely my audio. During the last few episodes, after listening to the show, I've been thinking, what the hell is up with my audio? And then I realized it's because I move around too much. Effy, I'm too passionate to stay in one place. And so right now we should take a picture and we'll put it up on our Instagram so you can see. I am sitting as still as possible in front of the mic with it as close as possible to my mouth. Honestly, it helped me arrive with what is an ongoing question in my life, which is, when do I adjust who I am for the greater good, which in this case is sitting still so that you can all hear me clearly? So I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Honestly, this is something that I've continued to think about in my professional life, in my personal life. Where do I adjust for the greater good? So yeah. Have you had to do that? Have you had to tone down, amp up, or make other adjustments for the greater good?
I mean, for sure. And before I share my story, and I'm only saying this because you shared this in the podcast before, so I don't feel like I'm outing you, but I think this idea of like, you hold on to a belief that you're too much, or I should say, we have both been told we are too something, too much, too loud, too intimidating, too whatever. And I think this is probably, wrapped in that, right? Like, it's like, oh, I need to sit still. Like, there is an expectation to be something different than you are.
Yes.
Is kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. I did a post recently on Instagram where I was talking about how I went to a trampoline place with my daughter and we were jumping up and down and I was like screaming and jumping because when I am joyful, I make noise. And at some point, my 9-year-old looked at me and she was just like disgusted. And she was like, "You are so embarrassing. Like, you need to stop yelling." And I like stopped for like 2 jumps. I like jumped in silence. And I was like, "No, this is terrible. I'm not going to do this. Jump somewhere else." And I continued to like squeal and jump and scream and enjoy myself. And that's what I wrote. I was like, joy is not silent. And in the same way, me sitting still feels abnormal, but I will do it for the greater good of this podcast, everyone. I will stay still so that you can hear me and then my audio is clear.
On behalf of our audience, our listeners, our community, I thank you for this. But I get it. Listen, recently, one of my clients confronted me because they listened to the podcast and they were saying how I seem to be way more, they are in the monopoly, stuckness, right? Monopoly mismatch. And they heard the episode where I talked about the elephant and the dolphin, and I was like, it's just not going to work out. Or actually, I should revise that. It's not that it's not going to work out. It's just not going to be what you imagine a relationship looks like. Most of us, right? And I've been working with them for now over a year, and we're working towards it. And they were like, "You have you're just so soft with us, and you actually have made your mind up. Like you take much harsher stands publicly than you do like in sessions, and." And that's not entirely untrue. Like, I wouldn't necessarily refuse to work with a client because they're in a polymono mismatch. Like, I would work with them and see if we can get it, if we can get it somewhere. I tend to be a lot less tolerant, of course, with clients rather than just like tell all the truths, like one after another. I'm just not going to do that in sessions, of course, because people are in the thick of it. But yeah, I have to bite my tongue regularly, I do manage expectations, and I do tell people right at when I do like a mutual assessment call that these are like, I'm not a therapist. These aren't going to be soft and gentle and cuddly. Like, we're going to work. There's going to be some tough truths. We're going to face them together. I never claim to be right, but I will just say what I see, and then we can decide if it resonates or not. And if you're like, no, you're just making this stuff up, then I'm like, totally fine. But but even though I said that stuff, I still like hold my tongue and think about like, how do I put this in a way that will get through without necessarily being too rough on people, and like constantly adjusting myself in sessions for the greater good, for the work that we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I worked with you. I remember being annoyed with you as a client. I remember like you were just saying like, well, that's just not like, honestly, you would be like, well, that's just not going to work, or that doesn't make sense. And I was like, no, like pouty. Well, it makes sense to me. And then of course, like a year later, I'd reflect back and I'd be like, oh no, you were totally right. Well, no, but I think it's different in the case of your client. I mean, first of all, as a coach myself, honestly, someone's willingness, or, you know, a couple in this case's willingness to work on something really does make a difference. And so the fact that they've been working with you and doing that work, and you're trying to figure out what's possible for them, the whole relationship by design concept is that anything is possible, right? With consent, with imagination, with willingness. And so even though you may be making the statement, which I believe is true, that in a lot of cases, what we believe is possible when one person identifies with being monogamous and the other one is polyamorous may not be possible. It does mean that you can still create a thriving relationship if you work towards it, which just sounds like what you're doing with them.
Yes.
And it's interesting that they were like, your podcast self is different.
they were so very much like, you're so much more like, I can't remember the word they used, but they were saying I was way more harsher on the podcast, or I should say more like decisive on the podcast. And I seem way more like reasonable and softer in sessions. It was an interesting, bit of the session. They were like, you're different on the podcast. And I'm like, yeah, a little bit.
What's interesting as you're saying that is my default, my baseline, I think, is a little bit more, I was going to say aggressive, but I'm going to try to think of another word. A little more harsher, a little more real, right? A little bit more direct, I think. Yeah. And so, for example, I remember constantly when I was in the corporate space, I would write an email and I would just get straight to the body of the email. Like, essentially, this is what I need from you. This is what I'm going to do. These are the deadlines. And then I would go back and be like, hey, how are you? Like, I would then fill in the rest of the email around that piece. But my default is to go straight to the thing. And as a mom, honestly, that's really been the biggest place where I have learned how to adjust. Because my style, I would prefer to be like, all right, Simone, put on your shoes, put on your this, get your backpack, da-da-da. And she will look at me like, this is crazy. Like this is not, and I realize it's not the tone. So I'm like, hey, baby, how are you? How's your sleep, my love? Can you go get your shoes now? And so that is definitely one place where I've had to learn how to adjust what feels like my natural default setting. Honestly, it's not even to her. It's just to humanity. I think what I'm saying with all of this, for people to hear me and to be right, you talk about communication is to listen, to be understood, and to understand. And in order to do that, it takes some adjustment.
Sure, exactly. And I think that's very much in relationships too. It's going back to how you want to be communicated, right? We talk about as a part of the design process is like a big component of it. How do you communicate? How do you want to be communicated to? This goes from tone to timing to duration, the way that you need to be approached. Like I get frustrated if there's a lot of padding. Like if somebody it clearly has something on their mind and they're breaking it down and do the mac praise or whatever, the praise sandwich. I'm like, I just need you to get like I'm because I have like limited attention. This is clearly important. I need you to get to the important part. Otherwise, you're gonna lose me, and this is not gonna work out for us, right?
And I literally posted probably maybe 3 days ago about doing the feedback sandwich.
Exactly.
Because I love it.
Yeah, that's the right way. Like I shouldn't say that's not the right way. No. That is a trusted way of communicating with someone.
Right. But it doesn't work for everybody. I mean, my wife is the same. She's just like, tell me the thing. Why are you just say straight to and I want you to start off with, hey, Jack, you've been doing a great job. I've been observing and I really appreciate you. And I have one small piece of feedback that I like to share, like ease me into it. But part of that is because I am a super overachiever. Any feedback that you're going to tell me, I have probably thought of, wrote about, analyzed, like I already know. So I want to be acknowledged and appreciated for the things that I'm doing, for the work that I've done. And this is definitely true in relationships. Like, you know, my partner will say, we'll have a disagreement or something, and she'll be like, all right, fine. Yes, I'm sorry. And I'm like, no, that's not, you saying the words, I'm sorry, but your tone is not sorry. And so it's interesting because as direct as I would like to be, I think that's also what makes me empathetic and simply willing to adjust is I really do. Tone does matter to me. Approach does matter to me. And so I try to keep that in mind.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get that. We've had this conversation before between us. I think we sometimes get into because we do so much work and we always like have a short amount of time to do a lot of work, and we do. And I think in those times because we know, at least I should say for myself, that I know that we can be direct with each other because I assume the appreciation is assumed, right? But it's not like it's meaning. I know it's assumed, but I think taking those minutes to actually say it out loud is really important. And then when we had this conversation, one thing that I reflected was like, I think even if you like it in the moment, you kind of dismissive of it.
Yeah, it's true. You're right about that.
When I'm like, this was really good. This was you like, yep. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'll get to the meat. Sure. Okay.
No, it's good. It's true. It's good feedback. No, you're right about that. That while I want like the soft and gushy and mushy and kind, I think that I do struggle sometimes with receiving it, or I deflect. Right. People say, you look great. I'm like, smoke and mirrors. Or they'll be like, you know, you did great work. I'm like, it's a good day. Like, and so you're right. I need to be better at receiving it if that's what I want. Yeah.
Like, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, exactly.
I had to learn that.
Yeah.
Like receiving the positive feedback, and then being like saying thank you and sitting with the discomfort of my like I just took a compliment.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. I'm doing that now with apologies. Like if someone says I'm sorry, as opposed to me saying it's okay, just saying thank you. I appreciate the apology.
Yeah, nice.
And that is also a shift. But one of the things I realized, and I think we've talked about this before, my wife introduced me to this idea. We've all been taught the golden rule, right? That we should treat others the way that we would like to be treated. And when I met her and in my work with her, she said that she lived by the platinum rule, which was higher than gold, which is to treat others the way that they want to be treated. And that always really stuck with me because I realized that exactly as we're saying, where I would maybe want to lead off with compliments and you're like, you say, get straight to it, that in emails or texts or something, I may say, or in Slack constantly, right? You and I are Slack all the time. And I'll say, we need this and this and this. Thanks! Exclamation point. And my thanks is like me trying to soften it to not being like, Effy, I need you to go on and do this thing. I'm like, thanks. But when I do that with my partner, she's like, the thanks sounds really obnoxious. Can you please not do the thing? Just if you're gonna tell me, just tell me the thing. But that's her platinum rule. So I'm learning now. And so essentially I think just ask the question. Like, what do people want? And do that thing.
And there's something there, right? There are clues. I find, like, especially if you're in a newish relationship and you're getting to know one another, there are a lot of clues in the way that people treat you, in the way that they want to be treated. So I think that the golden rule is what we've been taught, and it's kind of almost like intrinsic. I think it's worth observing somebody the way that they're treating you, and then see if you can gather some information from that and then present it to them. Like, do you prefer, I'm curious, how do you like to be communicated? I noticed that you prefer to communicate directly to me. Is that how you like to be communicated? Yes. And then that's a really good way to bring it up with people, to sort of observe the way they're doing it and then reflect it back to them as like, is this an indication of how you like to be treated? Not in an obnoxious way, but in a real observation, like checking in, getting to know the other person kind of way.
Oh, completely true.
And they can either say, actually, no, this is how I want to be communicated, or they can be like, yes, like, please, that's how I want to be communicated. In those cases, then you have an opportunity to then say, great, and this is how I like to be communicated.
Exactly. Yes. I am known for someone will send me like 2-word text and I will respond in 2 paragraphs. Like you and I, I've shared this, right? If I had more time, I would write a way longer letter. Like brevity is not something that I am good at. But that is something that I love. Like someone will tell me something. I'm like, tell me more. Like I love details. I'm curious. I want all the details. And of course, I'm partnered both with folks who are highlight folks. I'm like, how was your day? Good. Anything go on? No. How you doing? Fine. And I'm like, this is what I had for dinner. This is what Effy and I talked about. This is the report I'm working on. And so I think that you're right. So to go back to the question, which I continue to ask myself is, am I willing to change who I am or tone down or amp up or make adjustments for the greater good? And I think the answer for me is yes, and it depends. I think if it is someone's platinum rule and it will help them, it'll help with communication or help them feel loved, I will make adjustments. And I realize that I do, in order for that to happen, I have to carve out spaces where I am just me uncensored.
For sure.
Like I can't be still all the time. I can't be quiet all the time. I can't be soft all the time. And so I do that a lot in my writing or in my presenting. Like I have to find spaces where just the inner Jackie can just be. And I think that makes it easier when I have to adjust in other spaces.
Yeah. Where it gets harder is if you, or anybody, me included for sure, if that adjustment somehow crosses a boundary of yours. Because you can make adjustments that aren't necessarily that big of a deal for you, right? I think it becomes harder when it crosses a boundary.
It feels inauthentic.
Right, exactly. Being authentic is, I should say a boundary or a value, right? That's kind of what the, and I think as long as you're not crossing a boundary or going against a value, we all can make adjustments, right? And I think especially for the greater good, for the good of the overall harmony of the relationship or a good audio for your podcast, like it is okay. But if for some reason, like what needed to be done for good audio somehow really clashed with a value of yours, I think that's when you're just like, actually, no. I think that's where the line is, right? Or if it pushed on a boundary, I think that's where the line is of like, actually, that's not where I'm going to make adjustments. I think that's when because you're like, yes, and it depends. I think that depends part maybe is when it either butts up against a boundary or goes against a value that you believe in. It's probably when it's like, actually, not then.
And how much of percentage of time, if you will, that I have to make those adjustments. I have been in relationships where I was a character of myself, where my representative essentially was in that relationship because I was doing all the things that I thought I should do to either be in the relationship or be successful or be whatever. And my inner me was caged. And that is not the way that I live right now. And certainly that's not the way I am in my relationships. And both of my relationships really help me deeply tap into who I am and amplify who I am. And so I think because of that, there are spaces like in certain, in communication of how my day is or in particular discussions where I'm willing to make those adjustments because in large part, I am just me all the time. And so I think I appreciate that level of freedom and am willing to adjust accordingly.
True. And what I'm hearing in there is actually around sustainability. Like, how long do you need to sustain that adjustment? Like you can probably sit still for the 2 hours that we sit to record the podcast, but probably by hour 3, you're like, I think we need to take a break. It's just not sustainable, So I think that's a part of the adjustment maybe is that, like, does it butt up against the boundary? Does it override a value? And how long it needs to be sustained are probably your like indicators of whether that adjustment is valid and worth it.
Yeah. Everything comes down to the same things, right? Tune into who you are, know yourself, know your partners, no matter what. I feel like that should be the exercise. We should just find some random topic, and I'm sure that you and I can drill it down to know yourself, communication, know your partners. Yes. So my point is, because I love you and our listeners, I am doing my very best to stay. And I realize right now, as I'm saying this, I'm sitting on a swivel chair.
I know this. You push down your swivel.
And you can see, so you and I are on Zoom right now, and you can see my fingers like fidgeting, like some part of me needs to move. So I will contain my body, but my energy will not be contained because I'm excited about the conversation that we're going to be having today with Jocelyn.
Yes, and I celebrate that 100%. And I'm excited for this conversation too. I mean, it's interesting because we are going to talk about knowing thyself in a different way, right? We're talking about the erogenous zones, and we're talking about getting to know our body, and especially the session that Jocelyn is going to do for us on Wednesday is all about the erogenous zones that challenge the status quo.
And honestly, it's so funny because it goes back to what we were saying. It's either, do you go straight to the point, right? Do you go straight in between the legs, or do you take your time? Do you do a little like erogenous zone sandwiching, like touch a little knee here, a little thigh there? So I'm excited to talk to her, and I'm interested also. She is another queer Latina woman, and so I want to talk to her about her experience in that. So we are going to be joined by the amazing Jocelyn Silva. So Jocelyn is a sex and intimacy coach that works with women and femmes to break through their sexual shame and embrace their sex lives with confidence. With 10 years of experience as a sex educator, her favorite thing is teaching others about the beauty of sexual empowerment. She's a queer Latina from immigrant parents, and Jocelyn understands the level of shame that can be inflicted on a young girl and how that shame can bleed into adulthood. She's passionate about helping to end that cycle and to uplift new generation of sexually free badasses. It's going to be challenging for me to keep still during this conversation because there's so many touch points that I want to connect with her on. So we're excited to talk to Jocelyn. As one queer Latina educator and coach to another, hello.
Hi!
Yay!
There's so few of us. I'm so happy we found each other.
Like, yay! There you are. All right. So now, because we found each other, I need to know. So please, tell us a little bit about your story, how you came upon this work, and the challenges that you likely faced along the way as being, I'm going to try my best to not insert my story because I'm sure just based on the things I went to your website, I've read your work, I really love what you're doing. There's so much about your experience that resonates with me. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about how you got to this place.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. I've been super excited for this interview. So thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so it all started when I was very young. Just a lot of shame, growing up. I went to Catholic school, kindergarten through 12th grade. I never really had a sex talk or anything like that. And so my mom is from El Salvador and my dad's from Mexico, and my mom is very Catholic. And so I was an altar server. I was a lector. I won the religion award in high school. I got a $500 scholarship in 8th grade for being most involved in my parish. I was a part of the Via Crucis every single year. I was Miss Catholic schoolgirl. And, but I experienced a lot of shame around sexuality. And it was until I was maybe 16 that I started dating this guy who wanted to be a priest and I wanted to be a nun, but we would do things with each other. And it got to a point where I was going to confession once a week, and the priest literally had to put me aside and say, you don't have to come once a week. And I was you don't understand. If I don't come to confession once a week, I'm going to go to hell because you don't even know the kind of shit that I'm doing. And he was you can come once a year, you're fine. But that's how intense it got for me, just this fear of God that I'm going to go to hell just for being a sexual person at 16. And then when I was 18, I had sex for the first time. My mom did not talk to me for a whole month because she was so uncomfortable with the whole situation. She found out it was a whole thing. So anyways, that's pretty much where my inspiration comes from doing all of this. And then when I was around 19, my friend was do you want to be a part of this collective called Coochie Los Angeles, which was a collective that focused in on sexual education, particularly for queer and trans people of color here in Los Angeles. And I was fuck yeah. And from that moment on, I was this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I fucking love it. It was just so revolutionary for me to sit in a room full of 20 people and just talk about sex and our sexual expression. And I think that was the first time I started embracing the word queer. So there's a lot more to it, but I think that that's the gist of the inspiration of why I do what I do.
So many questions at once, Effie. I'm gonna need to jump in. I just need a minute.
I mean, all I could think of was just so many parallels from your story, like this religious upbringing. It's one of the things that, Jackie and I have very opposite experiences. I had no religious background. My parents are like these like intellectual, I wouldn't say they're atheists, but like for us, religion was just theology. It's like something that you understood and learned about, and we learned about, we spoke about all the different religions and in this very kind of theological, discussional kind of way. And then Jackie is like completely the other end, very similar to your experience of like church, and thinks that she's going to burn in hell. And, and she's told these stories many, many times. And when I'm hearing you, I'm like, yeah, I've heard this before. It's hard. It's hard and harsh.
Yeah. Culture and religion and family and ancestry, and like there's just so many layers of things, and gender and heteronormative behavior and misogyny. Like there's so many things layered onto us that make it difficult, because what I hear from your story and what resonates with me is that who you are, what lit you up, what brought you joy was in conflict with what you were told you needed to be, how you needed to be, what you needed to be in order to be seen as successful, as pure, and that inner conflict, to your point, just creates so much shame. Talk a little bit about how you were able to strip yourself, or the ongoing process of stripping yourself from that shame.
Actually, I was going to add something because you're going to answer this question. The other thing that came up for me is from what Jackie is saying is, I think we are about to do a session on this in a couple of weeks, which is that you can't be faithful. Like, you can't be spiritual and faithful and religious and sexually self-expressed. I think that's the thing. It's like you have to abandon faith in order to be your fully sexually self-expressed self. I think that's the other conflict. Like, it's not that you're being told that what you're doing is wrong, but you can't have it. Essentially, you're not allowed to have both. You can't have faith and religion and spirituality and the community that comes with all of that and be a sexually fully self-expressed person. You have to choose one or the other.
I think that the message is that we can't.
Yes, that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
The message is that those two things cannot live together. That religion and faith and spirituality cannot live alongside sexuality, right? But that is actually, that's not true. And it's interesting because actually the session, so you are going to be joining us in the virtual Curiosity Salon on October 14th. And the following week, October 21st, we have an educator. Her name is Deandra Blackett Johnson, and she's going to be doing a session on sex and spirituality and all about this conversation. And so it has been something that we constantly talk about, because a lot of the work that we do and a lot of our curious foxes are dealing with balancing their curiosity and their authenticity and all of this noise that have told them that that is wrong. And so talk a little bit about that, about unpacking the shame.
I have so much to say about everything y'all just said. Oh my God, where do I begin? Okay, so I just want to preface this by saying that I have a kick-ass relationship with my higher being, my higher power in the universe. Like, I got my God box. I got stage. Like, before this, I told my higher power, like, I put this in your hands. Like, this interview goes in your hands. But it took a lot of time. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to talk to what Jacqueline was saying about like shame. For me, I feel very fortunate, because the first time my first sexual experience was with this guy who was my boyfriend at 18. And I mean, like, it was super beautiful. The first time we had sex, he lit candles, he lit incense, he played 80s goth music. We had like Bauhaus in the background, and super just like sensual and like calm. So I'm like, it's interesting because thinking back, I think, wow, like I had this beautiful first time experience, but I was so shamed by my mom and the church about even the act of having sex, but it was consensual. It was beautiful. It was so considerate and loving, right? Like I did make love the first time. And so that contrasted with like, my ability to be able to like be proud and be like, oh my God, I had sex for the first time and it was great. And instead it was like, you had sex? Skirt? Like, hold on, like that's not what we do as like a good Catholic person. So yeah, so that was just like a huge contrast. How to keep stripping from that shame? Well, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. Like, Brene Brown is my girl, fucking love her. Mm-hmm. And it was incredibly eye-opening when I started seeing her lectures and she was talking about vulnerability and shame. And I carried so much shame around, but also something that's very important to my story that I don't talk a lot about, but I'm slowly getting more comfortable talking about it, just because I think it's such an important part of me. And I think a lot of people can resonate and relate. Just like I didn't get talked to about sex, I also didn't get talked to about having a healthy relationship with sex. And so I was a sex educator for a really long time, 10 years. I started when I was 19. I'm 30 now, 11 years. And through that, I started really developing a lot of an unhealthy relationship relationship with sexuality. I, used masturbation as a way to escape. And I cheated on all of my partners, and I was really manipulative and was really not expressing myself. But I under the guise of I'm a feminist, empowered, queer woman, I can do whatever I want. And I really hit a really low bottom a couple of years ago and actually got into 12-step program for sex and love addiction. And through that program learned my relationship with sex, the way that I navigate the sex world is incredibly unhealthy. And so that's kind of when I had my spiritual awakening. And the beauty about 12-step program is how they talk to you about developing your own definition of higher power. For example, my higher power is not a man. My higher power is gender neutral. My higher power is queer. My higher power is sexually empowered. My higher power is compassionate and loving and funny and has my back. And I've developed a lot of values through this journey, integrity and honesty and fucking feeling your fucking feelings. Even though it sucks and it hurts, feeling those goddamn feelings. Feeling those feelings. And it's just been such a journey. And I think that if it hadn't been for those dark moments in my life, I wouldn't be where I am now. And also, I do feel like those experiences have made me a better sex coach, because I'm not perfect. I wasn't just 18 and I got this. No, I struggled and I fucked up a lot, and I engaged in a lot of toxic behavior, which got me to where I am now. Yeah, that breaking down of the shame, it was really helpful just to be honest to people. I think we live in a society where compassion is not at the forefront of how we relate to one another. Judgment, ridiculing, and shaming is. So when we make mistakes, instead of saying, wow, why did you make that mistake? What happened? We're oh, you're a fucked up person. Fuck you, right? And so just learning how to be compassionate, I'm human. We all make mistakes. It's cool. How can we bounce back from this? And developing this new definition of a higher being has really helped. Also, I bring God into my masturbation and sex life. After I had an orgasm, I'm thank you, God. That was awesome. It was great. Thank you for giving me the ability to express this pleasure, because my higher power has given this to me. So a huge shift. But I was atheist for a long time. But there has been a big shift in my spiritual expression. I also bring a lot of meditation into my workshops and my work. So I will be conducting a guided meditation on the 14th, because that's something that I find to be really an important part of my work with my clients.
I mean, I think you answered the question that I wanted to ask, which is where are you with God now? We also spoke about this with Marie de la Font, where she came from a very religious background, and she kind of abandoned it all, and it was a toxic environment. She talks about this extensively, and she kind of, where she is now is an atheist, and she doesn't even acknowledge a higher power, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I'm always interested in where that journey is. I think with Jackie, I know you still have you go to church or mass, or I'm also ignorant about religion. I'm sorry if I say the wrong things, people. No offense to your religions, your faith, your practices. I am purely ignorant about the subject, so I apologize.
Well, I was going to say, they're all the same kind of thing. They're all services and they're all traditions. Everyone just wants to claim a new name for it. So, but no, to your point, faith is still really something that's important to me. And it took me a long time to be able to separate kind of the God of the Old Testament, if you will, and God of the New Testament, or the God of my upbringing who was judgmental and punitive, and the God that I believe created me and all of those feelings that I was having. And to your point around just feeling the feelings, Like, my God, how many years has it taken and continues to take for me to just feel the feelings? Because when you are taught for so long that who you are, what you are feeling, what you're desiring is wrong, it takes a long time for you to be able to tap back into that in a way that feels really comfortable.
Even now with my partner, I mean, there are times where like I almost feel like I'm buckling into a roller coaster when I like, okay, so there's this thing that I don't really want to talk about, but I really have to tell you. So like, here it goes. And I'm like through tears, like telling my partner, like, oh, this is how I feel. And like, because the fear of rejection and abandonment is so real. And then the partner looks at me and is just like, oh, like, it's fine. Like, thank you so much for telling me. But it's just that initial, like, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to feel the discomfort and the anxiety and work through it. Huge and very challenging.
What I love about your story too is you share out that at 18, no magic dust fell from the sky, and you were like now the perfect educator, sex educator, and we're like the guru of sexuality. That you learned via mistake, that you dealt with manipulation and shame and heartbreak and all the things that human beings do. And I think that that's actually really important to share, because I think that our humanity actually helps us connect with others and helps us as educators, helps us as coaches, because there's so many times I think that the folks who I work with, they work with me because I can say, oh, I get that. And I really do get that. Like, oh, I've made that mistake, or, oh, I felt that distraught, or, and so I love that you finally found that that was empowering, that you have made those mistakes and lean into that in order to be able to be there for people in a way that is more human.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's the idea that you can relate in that kind of that happened to me too, or I screwed up too is powerful for sure.
Yeah, I'm interested in Effy and I have been talking about this recently. You shared in your story that it took you a little while to identify as queer. And that is not a word that actually I came to easily as well. I think that I have a sister who is 8 years younger than me, and she identifies as queer. And when she first started using that language, it felt like I don't know, it just didn't connect with me. It felt like either young or like my language, I'm almost going to be 40. And so queer was not a positive word when I was growing up. And so that was not something I wanted to identify with. And I identified as pansexual, but then people would start to say, well, but would you sleep with this person or with that person or with it? And it just felt like I had to explain myself, but it didn't really feel bisexual because it didn't feel like cisgender. And it just felt, frankly, so complicated that I was just like queer. Like that felt like a catch-all that I would have to. And then there was something about that felt freeing, that I was like, it's all the things and none of the things. Like, you can't define me, just not straight. And so, and Effy and I have been talking about this because she's trying to figure out what language she uses for herself. So I would love for Effy to share, but I want for you to start with, how did you land on that word? I'm just interested because you named that.
Yeah. Also, I have a 45-year-old brother who's gay, and so he hates the word queer too. He's just like, oh, he's like, that's what we were called in high school, and it was fucking demeaning and degrading, and I hate that word. And so even he's like, I don't understand why kids use that word nowadays. But yeah, so for me, I still remember I never resonated with heterosexual. I'm like, I'm not straight. Like, it just didn't feel right. I don't know, it never felt right. And I remember just being like, I don't know, I'm just a sexual person. Like, I'm just a sexual person. I love sex. Like, I love people, whatever. And then actually so funny story, when I got into Coochie and I did the application, I wrote queer in the application, but then my little 19-year-old self, baby queer, in like a room full of 20 people, we had to identify our sexual orientation. And I was like, I'm straight. And I remember looked at me and they were like, what the fuck? Like, okay. Because I was so scared of like being like, I'm queer, So for me, it's just like, I feel like my sexuality is so incredibly fluid. And sometimes these labels kind of feel restrictive. Like, oh, if I say that I'm gay, like, okay, I only date like women, you know what I mean? And like, oh, I like straight, I only date men, bisexual, whatever. Right. So I think queer for me does feel really freeing. It just also feels like I just like humans, like I'm just really into human beings. Like, I don't give a fuck what your gender is. Like, you're hot, you're sexy, you got a great personality, you're conscious as fuck. Like, let's do this. You know what I mean? Like, why does that have to be a factor? I guess for me, if I had to identify with something that maybe was closest, I would either be pansexual or bisexual. But even then, I'm just like, I'm a human that really likes humans, and like that just feels more authentic and in tuned with me. If you're a human being, then you have a chance with me. Yeah.
Love it. Yes to all this.
Yeah.
All right,
Yes.
how do you weigh in?
I mean, this is the ongoing discussion. We should do a whole episode on this. Right now, I don't know why I don't identify with queer, though I just got close to it when you said, I think, Jacqueline, you said, just not straight, which I'm like, oh, if I think about it in those terms, I'm like, that resonates with me. And then I think, Jocelyn, we feel the same way. I feel the same way as you, which is this idea, like, if you're a human, you have a shot. And then if people ask me what my sexual orientation is, my answer is a cheeky particular. So if people say, what's your sexual orientation? I'll say particular. And that just means I am generally like particular about the people that I have sex with, but not for the reasons that it has anything to do with my orientation. It's not your gender or your sexual expression that I'm particular about. I'm just particular about the people themselves. And as long as they're a human being, consenting human being that I have the hots for, and that could really mean like, that comes in any shape, size, form, then I'm game. But it's not like my particularity isn't about gender. It's just about a bunch of other things. And then, like you said, if you're a human being, consenting human being, and I have the hots for you, yeah, game on.
A few years ago, I remember I met like this guy at a bar, and he was super hot. And then like we went back to my place, and he like chugged like a cup of like a can of beer, crushed it, and threw it. And I was like, great knowing you. I'm gonna go inside. Like, you can go home, because I'm like, a litter? I don't want to like have this. So I understand like particularity. Like, there's like some things in a human that like I would particularly like to have if I'm going to engage. One of them is don't litter.
Yes, exactly. It's like an intellectual connection. It's like value systems. Like, there's just so many things that need to align for me. Just gender and orientation is just not one of those things. Mm-hmm. But there are just like a bunch of other things that need to align. So that's kind of where I end up. Yeah, and then the queerness thing, I just got close to it, Jackie, with you saying just not straight. I'm like, okay, I can maybe get behind that.
It took me a little bit. Now I'm interested because we're talking, essentially we're saying it doesn't matter what's in between someone's legs, right? Like it's their vibe. It's, if, like you said, you're conscious, you are thoughtful, we have shared values, you're hot. And this is similar to what you're going to be talking to us about on Wednesday around, let's not just focus about what is in between people's legs. And so I wanted to spend some time in that space, because I've certainly been in relationships where sex meant, what, as Effy describes it, hard penis, wet vagina. Like, that's, those two things equal sex. And it wasn't until, frankly, I started to have sex with women that I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So let's, can you give us like a little sneak peek of what's going to happen on Wednesday? Like, tell us, what are the erogenous zones outside of the core areas that we know and love?
Yeah. So before I get to that, I just wanted to say it's so interesting to me, like the questions that because I get a lot of questions on my Instagram or on my TikTok of people just like wanting to know things. And I always find it fascinating when people are like, I get women, they're like, I'm going to have sex with a woman for the first time, and like, I don't know what to do. Like, do you have any tips? Like, what do women like? Or like, even men will be like, what do women like? Or like, guys will be like, I'm going to have sex with a guy for the first time. Like, what do guys like? And, here's the thing about genitalia and sex. Everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
Tell you, quote unquote, what a vulva owner enjoys. You know what I mean? Like, because that vulva owner is different from me, is different from my partner. It's just different. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, the best thing to do if you're going to engage with someone sexually, whatever they have in between their legs, okay, is ask, what do you like? Do you like this? Do you like that? Does this feel good? Does that feel good? And that's just all it is. And I think that at the core, like, there's so many things that we use for great sex, but really all it really takes, and honestly is the most challenging part, is just having clear, open, and honest communication. And it's like, if you got that, then like, no matter what someone's body looks like, you can have great sex.
What I'm hearing you say is that it is about curiosity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Staying
Look where we
curious.
landed.
Yeah.
It's true. It's just asking, hey, what do you into? I always like to do like the restaurant analogy where I'm like, if I'm at a restaurant and the waiter comes to me and says, what do you want to eat? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, what do you think I want? Like the waiter's going to be like, excuse me. You know what I mean? But if I'm like, hey, like I would love the vegan burger with like French fries, and the waiter's going to be like, dope, coming right up. And if the order gets wrong, then if the order is wrong, then I say, hey, my order is wrong. Can you maybe change this up? Right? That's how sex is. Like, what do you like? I want to be spanked on the butt with a flogger. Wonderful. Oh, that didn't feel right. Can you do it this way? Awesome. Great. Now we're having a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So I'm super excited for the Erogenous Zones workshop. That was actually a workshop that I learned through Coochie. I talk about Coochie a lot. Shout out to Coochie. Coochie changed my life, honestly. It was literally a small collective of queer folks here in LA who were like, we need to create spaces for sexuality around queer and trans identities. Opened my eyes. Beautiful. And so usually this workshop is done in person, but I kind of switched it up to do it virtually, because of everything that's going on. But what this workshop does is challenge the ways not only that we see erogenous zones, but also how we treat those erogenous zones. So, for example, I have dated people that are trans, that are queer, and the way that they treat their genitalia maybe is not traditionally how we have been taught to treat genitalia, right? And so what this workshop is going to do is really encourage us to question how we want our body parts to be treated, and to know that it doesn't matter the label of what's in between your legs, but it's about what do you enjoy and what don't you enjoy, okay? And so that's a really big part of it, is like everyone treats the genitalia differently. So like, let's figure out what you like, and let's talk about how you can have an open conversation with someone else. Another part of it is like figuring out other erogenous zones in your body, right? So there's going to be like, we're going to do like an anatomy. There's going to be like a human person, and not a human person, but like a diagram, and just having people point out the parts of their body they like. There are different erogenous zones in our bodies, but what I want what this workshop essentially is encouraging is the notion that your entire body is an erogenous zone. And it's about understanding what you like and what you don't like, right? So like, I can be like, I love to get spanked hard on my ass, and like, that is my erogenous zone. Someone else could be like, I fucking hate that. Don't ever do that to me. You know what I mean? Or some people say like, I like really light touches in between my thighs. Or I really love like the back of my neck to be like massaged, right? So it's about understanding what you enjoy, the pressure of it, the type of sensation, and where. So I'm also going to be encouraging participants to touch different parts of their bodies, and just kind of see what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And that's going to also be really telling. And another reason why I love this particular workshop is because my biggest passion as a sex educator and a sex coach is creating spaces to talk about this. So where are you gonna go work out? At the gym? Where do you go to shop for food? At the grocery store? Where do you go to worship God? At the church? Where do you go, I don't know, to get money? At the bank, right? Where in society do you go to have open discussions around sexuality? Literally nowhere. So creating these spaces to be able to be like, in this space, we're going to talk about your sexual expression, and it's welcomed and it's encouraged and it's celebrated, is revolutionary. And that's what this workshop encourages folks to do, is to be able to say, I really enjoy X, Y, and Z. I actually know for a fact I don't like X, Y, and Z. And that's powerful, because if you can talk about that in a workshop, then you can talk about that with your partner a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
And permission even to explore, to figure out what that is, so that you can figure out, do I like the spanking? Do I like soft touch? Do I like hard touch? Like, let's just play and see and explore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I like that you're creating you are giving the foundations and tools for a dialogue, because I can tell, at least from my experience, and I know there are many people out there who feel the same way, which is those things shift for me. What feels hot in 1 minute or what feels hot in one session might just be like ew the next. Like I might be in a state where I really like light touch in my inner, my inner thigh with like the very tips of your fingers. And then if you do that when I'm, really amped up, then it just feels really irritating. Like I'm just like, get it off me. So I think giving people tools and guidance on how you can talk about the stuff and how you can discuss it, and then you give them language and how to kind of break it down. I think it also means that it can be a continuous dialogue, and to realize that our bodies, our senses changes, and then we can, and it's okay to continuously update, check in first and foremost, like check in, is this still feel good, and then be able to talk about it to your partner in the moment, and then also for your partner to be able to ask the questions and then get feedback and adjust. And it sounds like the way that you are laying this session out, this workshop out, it is really less about pointing out like, this is a hot zone, this is not a hot zone, but more about like, how do you have the conversations to discover your own hot zones and erogenous zones, and by the way, they may also change, so this is actually like a continuous practice.
Yes, and also, I love everything that you just said. Absolutely. Like when I did a blowjob workshop a few weeks ago, and I love this meme. It was like an Austin Powers meme, but I love it because it said, "What is it today, baby? Spits or swallows?" And I loved it because it's like, what is it today, right? Today, I'm into this. Tomorrow, I may not be into this, right? But it's about having that ongoing conversation, and also people learn how to communicate things that are acceptable in society. We learn how to order food, right? We learn how to do math. We learn how to, I don't know, there's just like forms of communication that we just learn how to do throughout our lives. We are never taught to learn how to communicate, how to express our needs and our desires sexually. And so workshops are like practices.
Even more than that, we're not only not taught how not to do it or how to do it, we are actively taught to be ashamed of it. Going back to what we talked about in the beginning, not only was I not taught how to ask, I was taught even thinking about it was wrong. Right. I couldn't even ask the question. I couldn't even give it language, let alone then learn how to ask that question. And so there's so much power in, number one, creating space for the dialogue, creating space for play and for figuring it out and for curiosity and for people changing their minds. And maybe I liked that yesterday and I don't like that today. And just being present with someone, paying attention to what you like and communicating that, paying attention to someone else likes and being responsive to that, all of it.
And also to that, there's a lot of layers, but I do just want to say, it's also understanding that if your partner tells you that something that you're doing, they're not enjoying, it literally has nothing to do with your value as a sexual partner, right? It's about, they just don't like it. And like, that's okay. It just reset, redirect. It's all good. Because I do get lots of messages online from individuals that say, if I tell my partner I don't like something that they do, they get mad at me. Or if I say something, I'm scared of hurting their feelings, right? So then there's like that fear of like taking up space. There's that fear of like not being validated, not being seen, and also hurting someone else's feelings. So not only being able to give feedback, but also take feedback and learn that like it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you as a person.
So if you and your partner or partners should all come on October 14th, because I think that this will really help give you both the language of how to communicate what you want. You'll be able then to have shared language to be able to have conversations with your partners around what they want. So let's make it a fun date night on Wednesday. Let's just all let's get cozy and let's get sexy and let's come together and let's learn. Let's create that space. To your point,
absolutely.
We go to the bank, we go to the grocery store, we go to church. Let's go to the virtual curiosity salon, right? Let's learn something. So I'm excited. So I've decided a few things in this conversation. I've decided that Jocelyn and I are going to be friends. That's the first thing. I have decided that you have to come back and talk more because I feel like we just scratched the surface of your story. And I think there's just so much more we need to dialogue about. And I've decided that Effy and I started the conversation today before you joined and talking about how I just get so excited and I can't sit still and I'm doing lots of things. And really what this conversation brought to me is about being present again, being still in myself, being still with somebody else, and really paying attention to what's happening in my body and in their body, and doing it with gratitude for my higher power who made all this possible. And so I'm excited about Wednesday. All right, before we let you go though, we are going to do some rapid fire questions. And so first thing that comes into your mind. So the first question is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self about love, sex, and relationships?
Uncomfortable feelings are okay and they won't kill you. So no matter how afraid you are to speak your truth, speak it because you'll feel better afterwards. And if that's great sex, you got to speak your truth and you can do it. I believe in you. Also, stop straightening your hair. You're ruining your curls.
Yes. I went back to my curls during COVID.
Yes.
I stopped straightening my hair and I went to my curls. Can we talk about that? Yes. So,
Yes.
my God.
I am very pro curls on both of you. So yes, no more straightening curls.
Such a good answer.
No more.
Okay, next question. What is one romantic or sexual adventure for your bucket list?
Yes. So my partner and I are currently working towards non-monogamy. So we're reading The Ethical Slut together. Also, my goal is to travel the world in a few months, hopefully when everything gets better. I would just love to have like a beautiful non-monogamous polyamorous relationship. That is the next step in my sexual journey.
Nice.
You've come to the right place.
Come and do this with me.
You've come to the right place. Yes. Okay. So how do you, Jocelyn, challenge the status quo?
By being who I am. I'm Latina, I'm bilingual, I am queer. And one thing that I actually find fascinating is how many Latinas I've actually welcomed into my space. When I do workshops, a lot of the people that come into my workshops are Latinas. And so giving individuals someone that they can look at and say, whoa, she looks like me, because I never had that growing up. And just being empowered in my identity, I think is how I challenge the status quo. Talking about pleasure. Pleasure is at the forefront of everything that I do. So let's talk about enjoying sex. Woo.
Yes, please. To be honest, we searched high and low for you because one of the things that we were looking for, we're always looking for diversity and representation and different points of views. And we were looking for a Latina sex educator, and there aren't that many of you. So thank you for doing the work that you do. There definitely needs to be more. One of our ambition is actually do programming in Spanish.
I am all for it. Yo hablo español perfectamente bien. Me encantaría. Yes. Let's do it. I would love to. That is my dream. Yes.
It is also our dream. So you can be a part of our dream. It's been on our vision board. It's just about managing capacity, but it's definitely, we're looking for, I've been passionate about this for a long time, doing this education in Spanish, even though I don't speak Spanish, but I just know that there is a need for it. And I think it is for the US, it's so important. It's so important. So yeah, so I'm amazed. It's just amazing to hear that. And thank you for the work that you do. Last question is, what are you curious about lately?
Ooh, I've been really curious about anal sex lately. So I'm going to out myself and say that I've actually never had full-blown anal sex. I can tell you how to have anal sex. I know all the tools and how to do it. But that is something that I've never just had, it just never have had the opportunity. So I want to explore my booty a little bit more. So that's what I've been curious about lately.
Now we need some booty love.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love that conversation that we just had. First of all, anytime that I meet somebody who understands, okay, there's too much happening right now in my mind because I think I was going back to the fact that I can't sit still. Now, because my body can't move, my brain is going crazy.
Also, I think let's just name in that you had a friend crush on her.
Yeah. First of all, I was thinking about that. I was like, do I have a crush or do I definitely think I have a friend crush on her. I think that because there's so much about her story that resonates with me, that anytime that you have those moments where it's like, yes, me too, that it just feels so refreshing that I just want to be in that more. And that was actually one of my takeaways, is that the effort that it takes to peel off the layers of religion and culture and gender roles and ideas of who we should be and what we should do, that all of that really does define who we are. And there were so many touch points in her story that I resonated with. So yes, absolute friend crush, number one. Number two, really happy to be having a conversation with a badass Latina woman in the midst of Hispanic Heritage Month.
Right?
So that makes me very happy.
Yes.
Yes. So to all of our, Latina, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic foxes out there, happy Hispanic Heritage Month. And of course, leave it to I don't know why it would be the Hispanic culture and group that our Hispanic heritage actually goes across 2 months. So it starts on September 15th and it moves into October 15th.
Yeah.
And so the reason for that is that September 15th, the middle of that month, actually marks the anniversary of independence for a number of Hispanic countries. And so that's why it starts mid-month. But yes, celebrating that. So that was really fun to be able to do that. And I think that some of my takeaways were really around the intersection of all the work that we do, essentially. Like the conversation that you just had with Jessie around sensuality and sensitivity. And what I loved from that conversation and that workshop was around like the buildup. That let's just not go straight to it, but like, where are you going to touch and where are you going to build up the energy and what are you going to say? That I love that buildup. And I think that was some of what Jocelyn was saying today, was being present, allowing for communication, allowing for that buildup. That's so much sexier than just diving right into it. And it's fun to dive right into it. Let's do that too. But let's also take our time and play with some of the other areas before we dig in. So that really stuck with me. The conversation that we had around religion made me think of our conversation with Marie, our conversation with DeAndrea, that there are just so many points of intersect between the things that create shame, the things that stop us from communicating, and that what we should be doing, as always, is just know ourselves, communicate, explore, be curious. So all those things were takeaways for me.
Serendipitously, I think this conversation falls in the middle of, in terms of the religious stuff, this conversation I think falls in the middle of the conversation we had with Marie Delafant and the conversation we're going to have with DeAndrea Blaylock Johnson, because Marie was very much done with the religion, hurt, upset, doesn't serve her in any way, felt very stifled by religion in every way, and kind of like shed all that, and now is all about free expression and kind of exploring all the things for her. And then DeAndrea is all about embracing all of that and sexuality at the same time. So like being very religious, it's okay to be religious and be sexually expressed, and like a way of sort of embracing all at the same time. And then I felt like the conversation, or at least where Jocelyn is, like somewhere in the middle, where she hasn't quite, she has her own interpretation of a higher power and spirituality, and sort of touches on religion in a way that faith associates. She touches on faith in her own way, and is also, it's important for her to be sexually fully self-expressed. So I feel like it's kind of it's like a nice journey from one end to the other, with this one in the middle. So I thought that was really interesting.
And I think the fact that she shared, for example, I've shared on this podcast about my journey in terms of masturbation and really having deep shame and religious fear around it, to getting to a place of feeling comfortable. And I thought that I felt really comfortable with masturbation. But, Jocelyn talked about thanking God afterwards and saying, that was a great orgasm. Thanks, God. I was like, whoa, I haven't gotten there yet. Like, that's amazing. That was like a whole new hashtag, masturbation goals.
Totally. No, I got that too. I was like, good for you, lady. I mean, it makes sense, right? Because if we are created in her own image, and that we have these parts that are purely for pleasure, and if that's what if that's what you believe, why not thank God for all the things, all the beautiful, juicy, delicious feelings and orgasms. So yeah, I totally got that. When she said that, I was like, yes, I love the way you're going about that. So no, it was a great conversation. I thought it was nice getting to know her. as I said in the conversation as well, we searched high and low for her. So definitely we need more Latina, Hispanic sex educators out there. I think it's really important for your culture.
Yeah, I agree. If you're out there, reach out to us.
Yes, please.
Let's do it in multiple languages. Love that idea. Because I think that the fact is, again, this conversation around how to do things differently, we are going to be engaging soon in the conversations around culture and relationship and culture and non-monogamy. And we've been dialoguing about, have these things existed? And I think when we had a conversation with Carolyn about her coming out process within and having the conversation about wanting an open relationship, she shared that open relationships existed within her family. They were just not consensual. That people had other partners or they had other families in some cases, and it was understood and there were agreements around that, if you will, but it wasn't really consensual. It wasn't really out in the open. And so I think that's also an important thing to talk about when it comes to culture, is that in some cases, these behaviors of not having a traditional relationship exist, but it doesn't exist in the healthiest way. Or the way it's been role modeled to us meant that it happens in secrecy or it happens with shame wrapped around it. And so I love the fact that there's more opportunities for conversation about all these things. And every time we have these conversations, it just makes me think. I started to go back and think to myself, okay, well, what are the spots that aren't being given enough to love? Like, are we heading right into it? I thought after that, I was like, oh, I need to go back to my partner and say, let's stop and play some more.
Totally.
I think we just sometimes get so into it. We just want to like jump right in. Like, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
Let's get some to Jessie Fresh's point, right? I want to feel your energy from 5 feet away, right? Let's start there.
For sure, yeah. And then like when the touch comes, let's start from like the crown of your head all the way down to the sole of your feet. And then explore and see what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and all the different types of touch and all the different ways of exploring. Let's make that happen.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when she was talking about the types of touch. Like, I do prefer softer touch. My partner likes really like much firmer. Anytime that I go to her and it's like soft, it makes her feel super uncomfortable. And I have to remember like, no, pressure. And if she goes to me too hard, I'm like, ooh, no, I don't like that at all. And so she has to go soft. And so really, again, knowing somebody else's body. And so I think that for the workshop that's coming up, if you can come with your partner, with your people, with whomever it is that you are playing with or interested in playing with, that this can spark some really great conversation. And immediately thereafter, maybe some testing of what you just learned in class. Like maybe there's some play work involved afterwards.
For sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is going to be one of those like hands-on workshops that we've done before. And she would do it in person, and there's a demo model. Unfortunately, we're not getting a demo model because it's COVID. Boo-hoo. But why not find a demo model for yourself, i.e. the person who is with you, the people who are with you. If not, your own body. Why not afterwards spend an evening with your own body and explore your own body and test out all the different parts and all the different touches and all the different ways of exploring? Why not a date with yourself?
Then thank your higher power for all the amazing orgasms.
Exactly.
Thank Jocelyn.
Yeah.
Thank your higher power.
Nice. I love it. So if you're ready to go on this adventure with us and discover the erogenous zones beyond the explored territories, then join us on Wednesday, October 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern in the virtual Curiosity Salon. Jocelyn will help us to map out the erogenous zones that are not genitals, giving us an opportunity to learn about other parts of the body that can be stimulated to bring pleasure without defaulting to simply what's between our legs. Tickets are available on our Facebook page, on our Instagram bio, on our website by searching We Are Curious Foxes.
And as always, if you're not able to join us, or if you're listening from the future, not to worry. You can watch the recording of the workshop on Patreon, all of our workshops, from all of our COVID virtual workshops to the ones that we did when we were actually in person. They're all on Patreon, and you can access those as well as get free tickets to our events, discounted tickets, exclusive events, and more. And you'll be supporting the work that we are doing to bring this information and this inspiration and change the noise. And you can learn more about Jocelyn and her work by visiting her website at jocelynsilva.com and on IG at sexcoachjocelyn. You can follow us while you're on there. We Are Curious Foxes, Facebook and Instagram. We encourage you to please go onto Instagram and click on that blue follow button. We continue to share with you our frustration around being censored and shadow banned. And the only antidote to that, it sounds like, is to have a bigger community. And so the more voices that we have, the more engagement, it sounds like that will help beat the algorithm. So please go onto Instagram and do that. And then like and review this podcast while you have your phone in your hand and you're doing all this Curious Fox stuff before you switch and listen to a different podcast and continue about your day. Just press like, shoot a review, share this podcast with somebody, help us change the noise. And if you have ideas about what we can be doing on this podcast or in any of our events, you can shoot us an email at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com, or you can actually call us, leave a voice message, and we'll play it on a future episode and answer that question at 201-870-0063.
And thank you, Foxes, for listening. And of course, as always, stay curious, friends. Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.